So yeah, this is a session called Recovered, and here's what we're going to cover. Four different things. What causes long-term compulsive sexual behavior and sexual addiction? What's underneath some of the layers that we have already covered? And number 2 is supposed to come up next. Okay, there we go. Yeah, what does it take to recover from sexual addiction and to experience freedom? How does sexual addiction affect the spouse who's been betrayed and the family? And what does recovery and healing look like for a spouse who was betrayed? So I'm going to cover the first 2 points, and then Kristen will cover 3 and 4. So yeah, the first part. Where does this come from? Just to cover some of the basics now, it can be a pretty complex issue, but really, if I could just put it all into a very short sentence, it would be, we don't trust Jesus. We really just don't trust God. But the more I think about it, if we look at all of our behavior, I could say that I trust Jesus. I could quote scripture from Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. I could say that I live that out. But my mouth and my feet say 2 different things. If I really look at my life, do I trust in God in all ways? Nobody really trusts God. So it's really a journey of learning how to trust Jesus again. So, yeah, we started covering some of the basics already. Lies that we believed about ourselves. The lies that I believed, no one likes me, I don't have anything to offer. Some of those core beliefs, and basically what it is, it's shame. So the word shame, we just cover that. Guilt versus shame. And there's a lot of different clinicians, counselors that use different terms and stuff, toxic shame and shame, whatever it is. I like to use guilt and shame, 2 different words. Guilt tells me that I failed at something. Shame says I am a failure. So shame really defines us. Guilt says I made a mistake. Shame says I am a mistake. So guilt is healthy. Guilt is supposed to turn us toward healing and confession and back into relationship with God and others. Shame turns us inward and causes us to define ourselves according to whatever the lie is. So these lies, where do these lies come from? and what happens as a result of the lie? So if I believe that I have nothing to offer, that no one likes me, if I really believe some of this, what do? I go inward. I hide who I really am. I don't try to become all that God created me to be. So I create a mask or a persona. And I actually likened myself to a chameleon. I could change colors just depending on the environment that I was in. It really got so bad as to when I would talk to someone who had a different accent. I could make up a southern accent like this, or I could, seriously. I would start talking. I would find myself, my voice changing. It's like, this is the way I talk. I don't talk with a southern drawl or anything like that, but I just got so good at blending in and becoming who I thought you wanted me to be, just to fit in, just to be accepted, so that people would like me. So believing these core lies, these lies come from our childhood. They're so powerful, and they really do define us. So masks and personas, and really, really that's what it is. Shame just allows our identity to become wrapped up in the lies. So we have to pretend that we're someone else, because the core of shame is, if you really knew who I am, the lie is that you would not want to be in relationship with me. And at the end of that lie is really abandonment. It's loneliness. And God wired all people for intimate connection with each other. He wired us for community and relationship. So if I'm hardwired to the core of who I really am to be in relationship with other people, But I believe if you really knew who I am, you would not want to be in a relationship with me. It just creates this entanglement where I'm going to create a persona. I'm going to pretend that I'm somebody else. So yeah, digging deeper, the shame. Where does the shame come from? Unresolved emotional wounds. And here we go. Yeah. So unresolved, the origin of the lies are unresolved emotional wounds. When we're wounded, demons are always right there, the enemy, and spiritual warfare. Kristen mentioned a little bit about that. So they whisper in our ear and they plant the seeds of the lies that we begin to believe about us. And then every time we see our behavior support the lie, like when I said guilt versus shame, if I define myself as I'm a failure, every time that I fail at something, it just supports the lie. But so the origin of that, unresolved emotional wounds. The wounds normally come from many different sources: our parents, siblings, babysitter, childhood bullies, teachers, and so on. And oops, yeah, I wanted to read a quote from this book here. Yeah. So this is a book called a life model book, Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You. It's an excellent book. I recommend all of you guys read this. And there's multiple authors from this book. And I just actually read this on the plane, on the flight coming out here yesterday. It says, dividedness and woundedness keep people stuck when a person lives life on the basis of the lies that result from traumas. Traumatic events often bring a twofold destructive legacy into a person's life. There's a wound and there's a lie. And people suffer because of both. Both need to be properly taken care of before a person can live from the heart that Jesus gave them. In order for you to live from your heart, you must live in truth, and the lies that are a part of your hurt will need to be broken. When your life is spent living from your hurt, that means the lies that are directing your life. When your life is spent living from your hurt, that means that the lies are directing your life. That's the way that's meant to be said. So the lies actually direct our life. Of the lies that endure as after effects of trauma, a very common serious lie is this: you'll never get better. Other widespread lies are, God may help others, but he will not help me. Or I'm bad. Or I deserve to suffer for the rest of my life. And I'll never be safe. So the lies are tailored to each individual person and to each individual trauma, but they are all lies, and they keep people living from their hurts instead of their hearts. So as I read this, I thought, that's something that I think everyone can resonate with. So when it comes to recovery from sexual addiction, the more that I've studied this issue and lived it out in my own life, these things I'm going to share with you, this is something that I think everyone really needs to do. This is something that the entire church needs to be involved in doing. This is a pattern and a pathway to learn how to trust Jesus again. Unresolved emotional wounds. So, yeah, digging further into this book, there's an insert that I'd like to draw your attention to. It should be, on this page here. Type A and Type B. So this is from this book here, Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You. And just to briefly cover this is a list of just some of the things, some of the woundings and where this comes from. So they kind of divide it into two different categories. I really think that there's three, really, but Type A trauma, this is something that we wouldn't ordinarily think of as trauma. When we think of trauma, I think of abuse. And that's Type B trauma: physical abuse, face slapping, hair pulling, spanking that becomes violent, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, torture, all of these things that are abusive. With the first list, in Scripture, God refers to us oftentimes as a tree or a vine, and if you think about it, what happens with a tree if it doesn't get adequate sunlight or water? Withers, dies. Yeah, if it doesn't get adequate sunlight, it doesn't grow up to be its full potential, to be what it really is meant to be. It doesn't bear fruit. So that, just taking from that imagery, that's where this type A comes from. So these are things that all of us should receive as we're growing up from our parents and so on. And all of these things can be wounding to us. Now, so when I went through my own story, my own process of healing from sexual addiction, I checked every one of these type A trauma and most of the type B trauma. So yeah, all of the type A, and this stuff comes out. You know, I started feeling uncomfortable when I saw other people actually receiving these things, being cherished and celebrated simply by virtue of one's existence. You know, what how do you live that out for our kids? And basically what that looks like, or having the experience of being a delight. When our kid wakes up in the morning, they come into the room and I'm tired and they wake me up, you know. Is it, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're here, go back to bed, you know. And I've done that many times. So I've not lived this out with my own children every day, every morning, but to be delighted to see them, even when I haven't had adequate sleep or they're waking me up in the morning, I jump out of bed and say, I'm so glad to see you, you know. This is something that everyone experiences, no matter how good our parents are, okay? So that's what they suggest in this book. Everyone can find at least one type A trauma wound that needs attention. Everyone on the planet, because there are no such thing as perfect parents. So yeah, in my story, the bottom part of it, my relationship with my father, I started studying that, and my father was, he was physically abused as a child, and grew up with a father who was it's basically spiritual abuse, you know, using scripture to manipulate him, like you better behave, or actually not necessarily scripture, but using the image of God, like you better behave or God is going to hate you, or he's going to punish you, or whatever it is. So that's, you know, some of the stuff my dad experienced in his family of origin. So in mine, I'm the youngest of three, and I'm the youngest of four. I have three siblings. Yeah, thank you. The youngest of three. Yeah, the number 3 is my siblings. I have 3 siblings. 2 older sisters and an older brother. Yeah, I don't even remember who I grew up with. Like 3 or 4, or something like that. It was so traumatic. I don't have any clue. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it felt like 3, because my brother was 8 years older than me, and so we had like 0 relationship, and we shared a room together. So at any rate, so yeah, by the time I came along, I was like an oops baby, and my dad said, I interviewed my dad as part of my own healing process, and he did get honest with me on some parts. He said that he had this picture of having a family in the suburbs, and kids came a little faster than he thought that they would have. And my first thought was, you know, that was really, you participated in that, you know. So kids came a little bit faster, so he felt unprepared. His father was a product and throughout my ancestry was through the Great Depression and finances. So finances were a big issue for my father growing up. So he worked 2 jobs, and then when I was born somewhere throughout my childhood, he worked 3. He worked downtown Chicago, took the train back and forth, and then at night he went as I call it a rental cop, rent-a-cop, you know. He was patrolling the malls and stuff like that, strip malls, and then he took pictures at weddings on the weekend. So he was not around, but when he was around, he told me, he said, I would get home, you know, so at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't be able to go to sleep, so I had to have some alcohol. That was what he told me. I had to have some drinks in order to go to sleep. So So yeah, you can just use your imagination, whether he was an alcoholic or not. I don't want to diagnose that, but many of my relatives said that he was, and he would scream at my mother. I've been told by my older siblings that he was physically abusive to them and to my mother. So if I look at type B, physical abuse, yeah, I'm not quite sure if I was physically abused, although I did realize recently that my brother smothered me with a pillow a couple times and I thought I was going to die. So that could be physical abuse from a sibling. Spanking that becomes violent, I don't think so. Although I know my dad was pretty angry many times at me. Sexual abuse, but verbal abuse or name calling, absolutely, definitely. Abandonment by a parent. Yeah, my parents got divorced when I was 9, and in any divorce situation for a kid, they always experience it's abandonment when they live with one parent. So that's what they experience, right? Whichever parent it is. So in the case of my divorce, my teenage daughter, she experienced abandonment from me because of that separation, and she came every other weekend, and I wasn't a sufficient parent anymore in that category. Torture, satanic ritual abuse, but witnessing someone else being abused, and my father screaming at mom and so on. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that occurred along my recovery journey. There's a story I remember after my dad started dating again when my parents were divorced, and I was with my soon-to-be stepmother and step siblings, and we were driving back from Cincinnati, and we stopped at Dairy Queen to get ice cream. We went in, and my dad said, "What do you want?" And I looked at the menu and I said, I want a banana split. And you want to know how he reacted? He grabbed me by the ear and he yanked me over to the side, and he said, "How dare you want that? It is way too big for you. You're never going to finish it. You're never going to be able to eat it. Everybody else is getting an ice cream cone." And I was probably 11 or 12 years old, So just for as an example of how this stuff plays out in our lives and it stays with us is, interestingly, as an adult, I had serious issues with buffets. Yeah, imagine that. How this stuff stays with us until it gets healed. I would go to a buffet. Okay, if it was an all-you-can-eat buffet and I was paying for it, I had no problem. I would load up my plate. If it was a $10 buffet, I figured that if I had 2 full plates, it was only $5 a plate. I would just eat to my heart's content. But family gathering buffet, I would never go first. I wanted to see how much everyone else was putting on their plate. I actually felt anxiety, and I had no idea why. Was never able to connect this stuff. So yeah, I've been asked, how is it for 27 years you acted out sexually, and then all of a sudden, in 2009 it just stopped. And some of the reasons is because I was able to connect with God like I never had in the past. The other reason is, I knew that there was a family of origin, a very dysfunctional family, and I was behaving this way sexually, but I never put those two things together. When I realized that, and I was able to start talking about it, and how that created the insecurity, stopped. The behavior just stopped totally. So after 27 years, 7 years ago, it just stopped. Being able to put this stuff together was such an awakening that I didn't need that behavior anymore. I didn't have to behave that way any longer. So, moving on. What else is in my slides? So the severity of trauma is equal to the severity of addiction. This is what I found to be true in my own case and in many, many, many other cases over just over 2 years of mentoring guys as a lay ministry, and then the past 4 years of coaching guys professionally in ministry. This is what I found. So yeah, people who have only experienced those type A trauma, type A, those are the people who say, well, it's just porn, and I've never really behaved that way with another person. That's pretty possible. But then, and this is just an example of this. Guy got referred to me, and I met him at Starbucks, and I sat down with him, and I was just interviewing and asking him questions, the multiple choice questions that I told you guys about his behavior. And so he was married, in a relationship with the same woman for 30 years, and so they dated for 5 years, married for 25, whatever it was, and then they had 2 teenage kids, right? And he said, he told me, I look at porn, I have a problem with pornography. I said, okay. So then I pulled this out, type A and type B trauma. We started going through this together. I found out that his dad verbally abused him and his mom and his siblings. He was actually physically abused by his dad. He was sexually abused by his uncle 3 or 4 times. His dad went to jail when he was 10 for 6 years. So over his adolescence, 10 to 16, he didn't have a father. So I asked him, are you sure that you haven't been with anyone else besides your wife? And he's like, no, I've just, it's just pornography. And I told him, so, I drew out something kind of like this chart. And I said, your trauma and the things you've experienced doesn't equal the behavior that you're telling me. So I said, I have a hard time believing that that's all that there is. After being married for 25 years, teenage kids, all of the stress and anxiety that you've probably lived through, and you've never had counseling, you've never done anything to heal all this trauma from your past. I said, you're going to have a hard time convincing people that that's all that you've done. And he just turned white as a ghost and started getting teary-eyed, but he did not confess anymore. So I just knew, and really through all this process, just listening to the Spirit of God, listening to the Holy Spirit, and being prompted. I think that I've gotten a lot better at that than I used to be. But just inviting Jesus into all of this, and just saying, God, you know everything that he's done. I just want to help him confess and get help, right? So I did it in a loving way, in an appropriate way, very appropriate way. But yeah, I told him, I said, I would have guessed you'd have had either 1 or 2 affairs by now, frequenting strip clubs, lap dances, whatever, prostitutes. I said, you're obviously not addicted to food. He's in great shape. I said, how often do you drink? Are you an alcoholic? I'm just looking, because this stuff does not go away. We can't push it away. We can't push it down. It has to be resolved. And really, the reason is it has to be resolved is because God forces us back into relationship. We have to resolve this stuff with other people in the context of community. So what do we do with the wounds? Medicate the wound. There's a word called dissociation. This is kind of what it looks like. Detachment from emotional experience. We find and use a coping mechanism or defense mechanisms in seeking to master, minimize, or tolerate stress. So this is the psychological, clinical term for it. But if you really think about it, dissociation, we all do this, right? Going through the airport with my 3 kids and all the craziness and anxiety of making sure that I brought everything with me to El Paso. What I wanted to do? I found myself kept pulling out my phone and checking the weather. Like, how many times do I have to check the weather in one day? You guys ever do that? You find yourself doing that? Like being addicted to your phone? After a few times, I've worked on myself enough over the years that after a few times of checking the weather, I said, okay, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety right now, hoping that my kids don't kill each other, we don't lose them in the airport, just all this stuff going on in my mind, all the things that we have to bring with us. It's just, it's a whirlwind. I'm not used to, I don't travel a whole lot. So just a whirlwind of all the things going on in my head, and I couldn't sort it all out. So it comes out in anxiety. I feel anxious. And I'm going to check the weather like over and over and over. Yep, it's still 80 degrees. Yep, it's still 80 degrees. Okay, it's 80 degrees. Focusing on that. I don't have to focus on my anxiety. I'm just going to check the weather again, you know. Oh, is there another hurricane coming? What? There's a typhoon, you know, and let's look at that video. What? It doesn't make any sense. But you guys do this all, right? I mean, we all do this. Dissociation. This is what it is. I love this movie Inside Out. Such a great movie. If you haven't seen this one, our kids have seen it 25 times. We own it. And so joy is telling sadness, no, I'm not going to feel sad. I'm going to feel joy, right? When what we really need sometimes is we just need to allow ourselves to be sad. I needed to just be honest with myself and say, I'm anxious, you know, I'm feeling anxiety. I have too many things going on in my head. So I need to pray about that. I need to journal. I need to talk to other people about it. So all of it is resolved in connecting with other people. So this is the way God wired us, because He wired us for connection. We can't push this stuff away. So yeah, when I have teenage kids, you know, come to me, well, I look at porn every Thursday. Okay, what happens Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Well, I have soccer practice Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Okay, what's happening at soccer practice? Oh, I'm really, to be honest, I'm not really that good at soccer or whatever it is. So Thursday, you look at porn on Thursday because your anxiety is building up and you're not dealing with what's going on inside of your heart Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So you see how that all you start to really connect all this stuff. What's going on inside of me that needs attention, right? That needs attention. So the wounds caused emotions and emotional pain. Most of us aren't taught how to deal with emotional pain. When I was growing up, we had the Marlboro Man as our guy to look forward to. We can, you know, he was my mentor. Back, you remember when that? Yeah.
Before he got canceled.
Before he got what?
Canceled.
He got canceled. The Marlboro Man. Yeah. Back when, isn't that interesting? Now the cigarette advertisements are, you know, here's a person with lung cancer. You know, do you want to end up like them? So yeah, back when they had advertisements, the Marlboro Man, he looked strong and tough, you know, like he's emotionless. I just want to smoke a cigarette too. Oh, that's great. The reason the Marlboro Man is so cool and collected and he never dealt with his emotions is because he's addicted to cigarettes, right? He's doing something with his junk. So so I started smoking when I was 15 years old too. Not because of the Marlboro Man, so I don't want to blame everything on him. But so emotions are like, if you picture this, it's like the language of the heart. So this is the way God wired us. So picture yourself walking down the beach. You're walking down the beach and you step on a piece of glass, right? What's the first thing you do? What? Bleed. Bleed. How do you know you stepped on a piece of glass? Yeah, it hurts, right? It hurts. So do you look at your foot? You look at it, you pay attention to it. How big of a wound is it? Do I have to get stitches? Is it a Band-Aid? Is there glass stuck in my foot, right? It draws attention. That's just the way physical pain is, you know. It draws attention to a problem that's going on our outside. So that's what's going on with our emotions, right? When we experience this, we don't tell our foot, hey, just don't do that anymore, you know, stop it. I'm just Bob Newhart, man, yeah, just stop it. Don't bleed anymore. Don't do that. So that's what I was doing when I was checking the weather. Just don't be anxious anymore, you know. Stop thinking about all the stuff that you have to do. This is why it's not, when we think about how beneficial memorizing scripture and praying is, it can be just another avenue. And that's what Kristen was talking about, over spiritualizing. It becomes another avenue where I don't have to deal with the real problem. You know, what am I praying? Unless I'm really processing with God. What's going on in my heart? What's going on that I'm experiencing? So, yeah, so our emotions are the same. When we experience anger and hurt, disappointment, sadness, when we experience those range of emotions, what's usually taking place? Where do we experience those emotions? In what context? Can you tell me? Like when we're in relationship with others, you know. Okay, we're walking down the beach alone, right? And we step on a piece of glass. But usually when I'm angry, it has to do with someone else, you know. When I feel sadness, whatever it is, it's connected to someone else. So those emotions are connected to relationship. God does not let us get away with pushing those emotions away because he wants us to. This is the way our body was wired. It actually gets stored. So if you feel anger when you're 12 years old, if we don't deal with it, it gets stored in our body. My psychiatrist once told me that all trauma gets stored in our nervous system, you know, which includes our brain. God created this real complex thing in our head between our ears, and there's so much that we'll never know about it. So God gave us these emotions to show us what needs our attention in our heart, relational issues that need to be resolved, so we can experience all of these emotions and for it to be okay. See, joy is not manipulating sadness in this picture, but there's anger and there's I can't remember what the other people are, worry and this fear and disgust. Yeah, broccoli, right? Do you remember the movie? It was broccoli. So this is really it. In Mark 12, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second commandment is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So he was being questioned. The Pharisees were trying to trick him again or whatever it was, and it was about the commandments that Moses wrote. Which one is the greatest? He didn't even mention any of the 10 commandments, you know. Well, except the first one was love God, but love your neighbor as yourself. I've heard people tell me psychology is not really in the Bible, but it was their opinion. Really, it really is, friends. Because if you look at these three, there's three groups of people that Jesus pointed to. You know, God, self, others. So really the way this process worked for me was I didn't trust God, and I didn't trust others, and I felt shame inside of myself. So it really worked in the exact opposite order. The more I understood who I really was, and the more I experienced healing in these emotional wounds, the more I was able to understand others. So I understood about myself, I understand others. The more I can love and accept others because I know where their sin comes from, not just the fact that we were born in the line of Adam, you know, the sinful man, but really what causes more damage. Does it make any sense, you know, if I experience that then I understand God more and why he created me? But really, so much of us, so many times, you know, we project our father relationship onto God. So, I looked at my earthly father before I started working on these emotional wounds. I saw him. When I thought of him, I pictured anger, criticism, and abandonment. So my heart's image of God was an angry, critical God who didn't want anything to do with me unless I performed for him, right? So how is it that I'm able to trust God fully when that's my picture of God? So in order to change my view of God, I had to resolve these wounds again. I had to actually speak to my father about this. And he did not like that conversation, by the way. So all this stuff is really a roadblock in the area of trusting God. So what does it take? Wounds don't go away until they're resolved, and they're resolved in relationship with God and others. So what does it take to recover and to be free, right? Unconditional surrender. How can I surrender to God when I don't trust him? Okay, yeah, this is a difficult process, especially with all the shame that we experience. This is why we lie so much and we don't actually take this step. But unconditional surrender is, I'm just going to get help. And this is why it takes so many times, it takes a tragedy in someone's life, in the addict's life, before they would seek help. Tragedy like wife kicking husband out of the house because he's been looking at porn, or had an affair, or was with a prostitute, or caught, however way that it happened. But unconditional surrender, confession. Confession, Proverbs 28:13, those who conceal their sins do not prosper, but those who confess and renounce them find mercy. So this is the process: surrender, confessing to one person, and this is not something that we guys want to just rush home and start confessing to their wife everything that they've ever done. That's a good idea, yes, but the way it happens for most guys is when they're ready to really tell their wife, if they do it all by themselves, they usually tell them a little bit of their behavior, and then they come back a month later and tell a little bit more, and then a week later a little bit more. And when you drip water on somebody's forehead, you keep doing that over and over for a couple of days, a couple of weeks. I mean, it's torturous. It's complete and utter torture. I would rather be hit by a baseball bat once than just have that drip, drip, drip. So working through with a counselor, getting professional help from a counselor or a recovery coach to actually do that confession step with our spouse is so important. But really it begins with confessing everything to a counselor. Getting it all out. Having a counselor tell you, I've seen this behavior before. You're not the only person who's ever experienced this. Getting a mentor, a pastor, or a friend who has a lot of experience in this area. And then a closed support group. I mentioned this a little bit earlier today, but a closed support group. So a closed group to guys only who struggle with sexual issues. So that we can be open and honest, we can be who we really are. We don't have to hold anything back, and that's it. The idea of being fully known and to know others fully is critical. So this is the reason why God, when I prayed over and over, I said, God, just take my desire away. He said, that's not the way this works. I've heard stories where guys said, well, I prayed and prayed and God just removed my addiction, and they never truly went through this, and I have a hard time believing that on the one hand, but there are miracles can happen as well. God can do whatever He wants, but for most, maybe 99%, it doesn't work that way. But it's a process. So yeah, closed support groups where we can have that real accountability that I was talking about. So what happens? What happens in the support groups? Yeah, we get to remove our masks. We get to be ourselves. I didn't have to be the chameleon anymore. Although even when when I started attending the support group and I started doing this work, I still was wearing the mask. It was still part of it. It comes off little by little, as I really understood that I did have things to offer the world. Getting a healthy perspective of self and others, and pay attention to our emotions and our heart, and really resolve relational problems. So this is the process that we just continue to cycle through over and over with the counselor and the support groups. And this is a path to healing and becoming all that God intended us to be. All right. So yeah, some resources. This is three pieces of material that I use and recommend heavily. Surfing for God is an incredible book. It was just written in 2012. It's very recent and contains a lot of detail of where the issue comes from. Wild at Heart by John Eldridge is an incredible book. And then this workbook, Faithful and True, by Dr. Mark Laser, who is also in runs a sexual purity ministry up in Minnesota. So yeah, using this material here, I found that and I was asked last night, I think, about a 12-step group. 12-step groups are great. And I tried that. I went to Sex Addicts Anonymous, and I worked through the 12 steps my first year. And Celebrate Recovery is another one. It's a Christian version. But I said, yeah, I'm Michael, and I'm a sex addict. And after a while of saying that, I just I realized, I can't identify myself as a sex addict when in Galatians it said that it's for freedom that Christ set me free. So I think that what happens is for those who are not believers and they go through the 12 steps and they identify with a higher power or a different God, whatever that is, they experience sobriety. And this is what I teach the guys back home. Sobriety is the absence of behavior. Freedom is what Jesus has to offer you. So these are the different pieces. And this is the material that I think supports that. Faithful and True does gravitate a little bit towards the 12 steps, but Wild at Heart and Surfing for God really support those beliefs. So Wild at Heart is not a book about sexual addiction, but John Eldredge mentions pornography in probably every chapter. So yeah, you could probably add sexual issues somewhere in there on the cover, and he probably wouldn't mind. So yeah, some action points. Parents, for your teen, we mentioned grace, mercy, no judgment, offer confidential help. Use consequences like grounding them, making it totally clear that they're being grounded because they're breaking the rules that you set by looking at pornography. Not because they're evil or bad or whatever. This is how we can remove shame from the equation. Explain to them the process of surrender, confession, professional help, mentor, close support groups. And this is a little bold, but when they get older in their teenage years, this is what my mentor told me he did with his teenage boys. Is he went through this with them, these traumas. So type A and type B. Oh yeah, I forgot. There's actually a third that I think is wounds of comparison. Wounds of comparison is not really on here. I don't know if that's another category or whatever. But yeah, I forgot to mention that. Comparison. Why can't you be more like your sister? If you tell a boy that often enough, he's going to reject his gender and he is going to turn towards the same-sex attraction. Why can't you be more like your sister? He's going to want to be more like his sister. Does that make sense? Now same-sex attraction can be a lot more complex, but this is one possibility, right? It really is very complex in many cases to unwind that. But the idea, is that it all comes from the same source, unresolved emotional wounds. When it comes to taking teens to support groups, if you force them to do it once or twice, I think that's great, but it has to really become their own personal choice. If you force them to do it over and over for months and months, sometimes it might work, but it may very well just not and backfire, right? Anyone in the room who's struggling, yeah, unconditional surrender, confession, seek professional help. Do this, if possible, before you disclose all of your behavior to your spouse. Don't use my words, by the way, as a way to prolong telling your spouse, right? That process can happen within 2 to 4 weeks from now, if that has to happen. But don't say, yeah, Michael said I shouldn't do that right away, so I'm going to wait 3 years. That's not what I'm saying, right? See a counselor tomorrow and start doing that. Process your sexual behavior with a professional, determine what your spouse needs to know. And I'm not saying she's not going to need to know everything, but she does not need to know details like how body proportions or color of clothing. There are details because women tend to compare themselves. What is it that he wanted when he was looking at pornography or the affair or whatever it is? So, yeah, youth pastors, offer confidential help. Really, anyone who's in ministry needs to offer confidential help. I'm not going to tell your parents. I actually, as a professional recovery coach, have parents sign a release form, and it says in there that I'm not going to tell them anything besides are they healing, are they working on their stuff, are they moving ahead, but otherwise I'm not going to talk about conversations that we have. So yeah, ask them for all the behavior. If there's sexual abuse, obviously there's times when you need to notify authorities, and it makes a lot of sense. But and the closed teen group by gender, and I think Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's something that Calvary Chapel wants to start if there aren't any support groups in the area.
Yeah, some kind of a network, some kind of support,
Mm-hmm.
some kind of strategy.
Yeah.
For
So yeah, for teens and for adults.
teens, adults.
So, yeah, and I think, so the group that I run with 15 teenage boys is age 15 through 18, high school students only. So once they go off to college, then I put them in the adult group. So, yeah, when it comes to adult ministry leaders, and there's the idea of an affair that comes up in your church, try not to take sides. I've seen that happen. You see a wife go through extreme amounts of pain, and sometimes we want to take sides, and we want to see the guy like suffer, and it just doesn't work. It adds to the problem, really. But to try to figure out how do I support both of these people. So yeah. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not a believer. So just go back to that Galatians, the second part of that we can give ourselves over to sinful behavior even though we're a Christian, right? So yeah, ministry leaders, counselors, clinicians. There's this is not for everybody, but this disclosure process that we were talking about, the confession, that's what this spreadsheet is, if you want to use that. I've used this in the way of coaching. I've coached guys through this. This is the behavior that I ask them. Have you done this, and this, and the frequency, and when did it occur? So there's professional training available for actually doing a disclosure with the husband and wife, and what that confession process actually looks like. So I included that. I've used that spreadsheet for a couple of years, something like that, year and a half, and it's been pretty effective. So, and it's extremely thorough, but it's all the ways in which someone may take their sexuality outside of their marriage. And so the categories, those are the categories that they need to confess. A wife or a spouse, if it's the woman who's been unfaithful, needs to confess all of that, all those categories. So yeah, if you're in professional ministry, whatever it is, you want a copy of that, you can. If you want to text me, email me, I can get a copy of that to you. So yeah, the betrayed spouse. This is when Kristen is going to come up and talk about.
We're just about done, you guys. I only have 3 slides left. So the impact of sexual betrayal on a partner. I'm going to show you guys. There's actually a name for it. It's I don't know why I wrote complex partner trauma. It's complex partner betrayal trauma is the term, because it affects every single area of the partner's life. What is this? Twin Towers before 9/11. This is Twin Towers on 9/11. This is the aftermath. And I'm not trying to make light of a national crisis, because this was horrible. And we all remember where we were when we found out. This is how it feels for a partner. The life before the D-Day of discovery or disclosure of the sexual betrayal, and then the aftermath. It's completely life as that person knew it is over, and something new has to be rebuilt. So it is imperative that I think that a partner gets some kind of help, whether it's through another woman who's been through this or a therapist, depending on how traumatic the whole situation was. 70% of partners who've experienced sexual betrayal meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of times, people who don't realize that trauma is what's going on look at that person and are like, they've lost their marbles. They think they're crazy. And indeed, they seem crazy. In fact, I have 2 dear friends in here who were with me when I was going through all of this, and I was not the same person anymore. I mean, I was a wreck, a total basket case emotionally. And that's because the person is traumatized. So with proper support and help, they can not only come back to who they were, but God can build something better and new. But if they don't have the proper support and help, they can continue to be further traumatized. In fact, they can even be traumatized by the church or by a therapist who doesn't know how to handle their situation well. That's why this is tricky, we realize. The person who's been betrayed, whether it's the husband who's been betrayed or the wife, needs emotional, spiritual, psychological, and physical emergency care. So we know what to do when, hold on a second. That's on my next slide. Okay. We need to remember that sexual integrity issues are not the partner's fault. The 3 C's, they didn't cause it, they can't control it, and they can't cure it. It's the responsibility of the partner who did the betraying to clean up the mess of what they've done. What does recovery and healing look like for a spouse who's been betrayed? They need trauma-informed therapy. So there's a really toxic way of handling a partner. I don't have time to go into that. But I wouldn't just go to any willy-nilly therapist for this because it can be really mishandled. Also, a trauma-based partners group for support. And I have run those over the phone or over like a Google Hangout, over like a Skype where everybody can see each other, so people are spread out all over the country. So if there were a need for that and there was no one to lead it here, I could definitely consider doing something like that, because these women need, or men, it would be men with men and women with women, need to be with other people who've experienced something similar and can walk through a process of healing. And they also need a non-judgmental, caring community to think of what this partner would need if someone they loved had died, because indeed, someone they love has died. The marriage has died, and that spouse, as they knew them, has died. And so, it's real intuitive. Somebody dies, okay, we got a prayer chain, we got a meal train, we're gonna help them with childcare. Do they need money? We don't think of any of this stuff when an infidelity or when a pornography addiction or any kind of sexual betrayal happens. But this is trauma with a capital T. And so those are the kind of real basic things that we need to approach that person and ask them. And when I work with partners, they often don't even know what they need. They're so traumatized. Their frontal lobe, again, that part of the brain that's responsible for impulse control, judgment, critical thinking, it goes offline. And what goes into activation is their primitive brain, the fight, flight, or freeze. And sometimes they can't even think what they need. So I might take one thing at a time. Okay, meals. Would it be helpful if we arranged for your family to be brought meals twice a week and for it to be left on your doorstep, no questions asked, no interaction with you, because they don't want to have to talk about it with random people? Just asking for, suggesting and asking for what they might need, and then meeting that need. And understanding they're so traumatized they can hardly think. So, also educating the church and educating ourselves and educating that partner about sex addiction if this is what's going on, so that they can understand it wasn't that you weren't sexy enough. That's not what this is about. This is not about sex at all. Obviously, that's a huge can of worms, the whole but I think you guys that have sat through this, you've gotten an education about sex addiction, have you not? Like drinking out of a fire hydrant. So, and then also the option to pursue a full disclosure and polygraph to rebuild trust. I know that's the first time we've mentioned the word polygraph in here, and usually we were doing this at a group of small group leaders a couple weeks ago, and when we mentioned polygraph, a couple of the women's jaws just dropped. But when we all went home later, one of the wives pressed into a husband who had sworn it was just an emotional affair, it was just an emotional affair, it was just an emotional affair, and she said, would you give me this gift and do a polygraph to help me have the reassurance, because I really had this nagging sense that there was more. And they stayed up all night while he confessed to her what had been going on. I'm just saying, there's no way to know the truth sometimes with drug testing. You know, if it's drug addiction or alcohol, you can do testing like urine testing, but with sex addiction, there is no way to know for sure unless God reveals the truth somehow. So that's why it is very common practice in this field to use polygraphs to rebuild trust. Also, I don't recommend doing polygraphs willy-nilly. You got to use a polygrapher who's trained in this area in conjunction with a therapist who's trained in this area. But a disclosure of what's been going on is necessary for that partner if they want it, because they need to know what they're trying to forgive and what they're trying to rebuild from. So if they want that, that's something that we highly recommend. This is a great book, Spouses of Sex Addicts, Hope for the Journey, written by the president of the ICSAS, which is the International Association of Certified Sex Addiction Specialists. It's a faith-based organization that trains pastoral and clinical specialists in the area of sex addiction. That book's on your handout. So, fire hydrant is being turned off right now, so you can ask your questions. Oh, I've got one. Oh no, this is not from here. It's just a phone number I don't have saved in my phone.
You don't have one?
No, this is from somebody who was here last night. So I'm not going to answer it out loud because she's not here. Do you want me to read it? It's I wondered what material you use with women whose spouses have sex addiction. I just shared it. Isn't that too bad she's not here?
Lunchtime. Everyone's ready for a nap.
Well, and we've been going for over an hour, I think. We've been talking for over an hour, so.
What percentage of your cases is this?
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. I would say people who walk in the door and acknowledge that that is the issue, 10% maybe. People who walk in the door and it ends up coming out that that is in fact kind of driving a lot of stuff, maybe a little closer to 25%. So it's one of those kind of things you guys have been talking about, the importance of relationship. That really is the pathway out of it, because when people come in, even in a counseling setting, they're very slow to actually tell you what's really going on, because they want to know if they can trust you. Because even as the body of Christ, as a church, we get burned.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I tell you something in confidence, oh my gosh, I'm really struggling with this, and you go, oh, Judy, guess what he just said? And now the whole church knows my business, and I was reaching out for help.
But they and we can camouflage it by saying pray. It's a prayer request.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that happens.
Don't tell anybody I told you this, but
Pray for them because they need prayer.
Yes.
I have a question. I deal with teens, and these are kids that have no church or whatever. And one of the biggest problems that I'm seeing right now with a lot of girls that I'm discipling is their addiction to sex. I mean, it's, but they don't look at it that way. I don't know how to combat this because they're surrounded by it 24/7. They don't have parents that have any kind of parental guidance for them in as far as they're not, the parents are kind of clueless in that area. But as I'm listening to them and they're talking to me just in confidence, it's coming out that, the girls are saying, well, it was fine for guys to do this for all these years, now it's okay for girls. Like, what's wrong with this? I mean, these are hurting mean, during prime time. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not even, it's on the trailers of the TV shows that are coming out and stuff, and it's just like, how do you do that? Like,
So are these girls, have they made a decision to follow Jesus?
yes.
Young, new believers.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're brand new young believers.
Oh man, you have your work cut out for you, don't you? God can use you to be almost like a second parent. I swear we don't get commission when we recommend books, but that book he talked about, Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You, it talks about spiritual adoption and that concept of when we don't get what we need from our parents, that maybe as adults we can go seek that or pray for it. But since you're an adult and these are still kids, like maybe that's part of God's calling in your life to like be a spiritual mommy to them. And to teach them, like, it doesn't have to be this way, you know, and to offer hope and suggestion to them that they're worth a lot more. Just for these girls, how many of them has pornography, and by the way, this is becoming a big thing for girls.
Oh,
Yeah, huge. How many of them was pornography a gateway for their sexual behavior?
probably one I know for sure.
Okay.
I think it's because she's addicted to her phone, like, if that blows me away. Like, if anything's going on in her life, she shuts down and her phone is her only friend. And, so I know that she gets stuff from her phone because she comes up with these bizarre things that we talk about, and I'm going, where did you get that from unless you were looking at, reading about it, or you can find anything on the internet.
Yeah.
And you can believe, if you don't know who you are, you can believe whatever they're telling you out there. And so her big thing right now is friends with benefits. And but yet after it happens, she's crushed,
Right.
she's used, and she doesn't understand those feelings.
Yeah, and so this is actually probably such a deep one. My phone number is in the packet. Let's have a conversation because this could go down a deep trail, but God could use you so much in her life and in these girls' lives to help them, start to realize that they have worth and value beyond their body. I mean, that's part of what they're doing. They're trying to get a sense of being wanted and a sense of being accepted and loved, and that they are going to get that legitimately met in you, and you can help them legitimately meet that need with each other. But this is obviously a long process of discipleship when you're trying to undo all the ways the world has imprinted on them. This is what it means to be a woman. This is what it means to be good enough or to be acceptable. It's heartbreaking.
That is, it's overwhelming to even think about it sometimes. I don't even enjoy the TV being on anymore because I think, oh my gosh, you're watching that, or,
Yeah.
it's, or movies, and even people that I know that are Christian and stuff, and they go, oh, but it was such a funny movie, and I'm going, I mean, just that movie that was out called Bad Moms. One of my Christian friends went and saw it and said it was hilarious and fun, and I should go see it, and I'm going, did y'all even look at the trailers on that? Like, just the trailers were traumatizing to me. And I thought,
Or 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, it's just
well, yeah,
super
but
mainstream.
why would you, but that's what I'm talking about. How do you combat that?
Well, you are by taking a stand and saying, I'm not gonna put that in my mind. And so thinking about what got you to that point where you're like, I don't want that in my life because of what are the consequences, like you might not be able to like preach it at your Christian friends, but you can talk to these younger girls who've taken on your leadership role in their life, of why, and they'll see a difference in you, why you live differently, why you make the choices that you make, and they'll see that peace and joy in your life.
Yeah, some of the teens that I see struggle have such a disconnect with their parents that I find just asking a lot of questions instead of trying to teach, and just shove more information. Because if we could tell them this is God's design for sex all day long, and if they're going la, 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 you're wasting your breath and your time, and it's like, yeah, we want them to understand that, but to go in the back door and ask them, Why do you believe what you believe? And I've sat down and I've taken notes. I'm like, yeah, let me say, that's really interesting. And I'm interested. How did you form that? Where did you get that from? And become really interested in it instead of shoot them down and say, no, that's not right. That's not true. So yeah,
I think that's why they even wanted to talk more about it,
Mhm.
that they feel safe.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Being upset because I wasn't the mom going, I mean, I did have to hide some shock, but.
That's okay. You
just
hit it though.
Because of my age, but I'm going, but
Yeah.
really it's, you're right, it is going in through that back door stuff. It's daunting. I mean,
Very
I'm
scary.
just sitting here going,
Yeah.
If a youth or mid-high or somebody comes and says they're having a problem with this, when is the time to get the parents involved and/or authorities if necessary? Do you have any insight on that, or
When the youth.
get the parents involved?
We asked, Terry and Michael were saying that there's not an official policy for the church on, obviously if something illegal is happening,
We have,
that would be, yeah, like if they're abusing somebody or showing somebody else pornography.
Or causing major harm, like to themselves, like maybe they're doing heroin or cutting, whatever, something like that. Yeah, if they're really putting their lives in danger, for sure. But yeah, the big thing that is really confidential conversations and guiding them through the process of telling their parents, but trying to just build a relationship with them and help them feel safe and understood, and go through the questions that I was suggesting as far as trying to find out what have they actually done, and what's the behavior look like. I've suggested pastors go so far as to go through the trauma list with them, and what's it like in your house growing up and whatever. And yeah, just with all of that, just the idea of helping them understand where is it that their issues are coming from, and to get the proper help. Yeah. And you could go through Surfing for God. Michael Cusick didn't write that book for teens, but I used it to go through it with a group of teens, and they really enjoyed it. There were just a few pieces of the book that they didn't understand that I had to explain to them, but it's all very appropriate for 15 to 18-year-olds. So you could just use that book, go through the book with them. Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of thinking through how to practically put all this into the context of how a church helps people. And so in my mind, I'm thinking three different things we can immediately take away. Number one, we should have somebody on our church staff who can help parents safeguard technically. At the
Yeah.
very least, have like a guide. Like
Well,
something-
and we-
sounds like you like
We could do this in a Skype format.
uh-huh.
If there were, that's what this was supposed to be, for parents to come. We
Right.
could do it again in a Skype format. Certainly we can come again in the future, but if there was somebody who could take this material and translate it to parents, but whatever reason parents didn't show up to this, they're probably not going to show up to something else.
No, I think what he's talking
What I'm
about
thinking
is
about
more
is
like
if
if
somebody
a parent
comes up-
comes and says that they have a son that already found out that they were in, what do I
Oh,
do? And then
okay.
hand them a paper, a
Hand them,
resource.
like,
Yes.
we can hand the parent
You
a
need to
little.
go online, you need to look up.
I
this,
gotcha.
You need to put this block on your phone, and let's equip you
Yeah, kind of a
to kind of
technical.
protect your family technically.
But shouldn't we be doing that?
Without having to come to a class.
Shouldn't we do that before it happens?
Well, absolutely, but
Yeah.
that's not the case. I mean,
But
that's-
shouldn't we could this be something you talk about on a Sunday morning, like parents, we have to protect our kids?
Well, that's what I'm thinking about doing.
Yeah,
I mean, so
yeah.
but I guess I'm trying to put together, what do we have to have in place before I do that?
I don't think
We gotta have
Ned-
some kind of a manual. So if you have an iPhone,
Mhm.
if you have an Android,
Yeah.
if you have a
Yeah.
laptop, if you have a wireless router, if you,
Yes.
then we talked about the open DNS and all that. I think I see kind of one way to fight is this technical
Yep.
Yeah.
thing. And then the
Yeah.
other way we fight is having a lot of these resources on hand, including your website,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, but the books. And then the other piece is support groups,
Yeah.
right? So some implementing support groups within the church, which gets a little dicey because, if we want to have a group for men who struggle with porn, who's going to show up to that?
Well, you know what? Here, let me tell you.
How do you advertise that?
Let me tell you what we have done in our
How
church.
effectively, practically.
Yeah, we call it every man's battle group. Do you see how shame reducing that is? It's every man's battle. It's not the porn group. You know what I mean? And that way, you're reducing the shame. It's a popular book title. People have heard of it. It's familiar. That and then, but I don't recommend using that book because that book is A, it's outdated, and B, it's not about as serious of an issue as we're talking about. And C, it has very surface level fixes for the problem that are not necessarily, they're not going to work for the deeper level issues. But there's also a thing of having a church culture where you're like our church, before we launched these groups, there would be periodic short video testimonies where people in the church would share their stories about this. And it became normal that the word pornography might be mentioned by our pastor on a Sunday morning in the context of the sermon. And here's how this can manifest in our lives. Some of us struggle with this. Some of us struggle with this. So that it's it becomes a normal part of our church culture that we talk about this. And then also there's things you can do to create a more confidential environment and to create a environment where people feel safe. Sometimes, maybe you meet in a person's home instead of at the church. And maybe you host it through here, but you advertise it through every Calvary Chapel. And what we find is that the majority of people that come end up being from other churches because they feel safer because they're not going to see a bunch of people that they know. That's so sad, isn't it? But what? Anonymity, exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we can give you guys our flyers, and so you'd see all the verbiage of how we describe it, and it's as shame reducing as possible while being truthful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in our home church, what she's talking about, playing videos, testimonies of people in the congregation. You can access one of those. It's a video series, and so our church does one in the spring, one in the fall. So they do this a couple times a year. And they pull personal testimonies and play them as part of the message to help people. So yeah, it became normal just to know people in this church struggle with all of these things, and they just kept seeing it over and over. And so you can access, if you go to Right Now Media and search for Northview Church, Keep Calm and Carry On. It was a series that our pastor did. I can't remember all the issues, but issues that people struggle with.
We were the Lust Week.
We were interviewed for the Lust Week.
That was our interview.
It was it wasn't the 7 deadly sins or whatever, but it was something like dealing with these issues.
Bitterness may have been one. I don't remember. It was a year and a half ago, so I just remember lust.
Yeah. So I mean,
That
it's
was
just an idea. I mean, it's something that worked, and it was part of building a culture in the church that was open and making it, not a place. I mean, certainly a place of worship, the house of God, also a hospital for sinners, and not a building where all the saints go, necessarily. Saints and sinners welcome both, because we're all both of those.
And you're welcome to use our testimonies on there if you want. If you find it on Right Now Media, I mean, we don't mind at all.
Yeah, you can, for sure. You could broadcast that as part of your sermon next Sunday or whatever. You could definitely use that. And yeah, so addressing parents like that in a message, and then also including adults that struggle, and connecting it together in a message, I think is brilliant. And start that process, and there's going to be a group offered. So yeah, it depends if to offer a group Sunday at 1:00 in the afternoon at the church is probably not going to work.
Right.
There's obvious meeting at a Starbucks on a Friday night or whatever. Something a little bit different, trying different things like that work. So building anonymity, making a safe place. So yeah, just having a group of guys, like we're going to be meeting, we're going to go through surfing for God, and it's going to be at Starbucks or if it's on the church, so some night when everybody knows that there's nothing going on, so there's no activity and all of that. We're going to meet in the cafe or whatever. Monday nights. So
Somehow you gotta have that kind of support group structure in.
yeah,
So now we've all been trained. I see a bunch of group facilities.
Yes.
yeah,
There you go.
yeah. Well,
All
there's
it takes is like a brave 2-3 guys or girls that
Yeah.
that are like, enough. We're going to talk about this.
One of my good friends, Doug. Yeah, he came clean. He was with prostitutes for years and cheating on his wife, and he sought counseling. He just invited a couple guys to Starbucks on a Wednesday morning. So it started out with him and 2 other guys, and now, I think it split up. Now there's like 3 different groups of 15 to 20 guys meeting, and they've probably had 150 guys come through these groups. It just started with him and one other guy, but yeah, he told his counselor about it, and counselors, obviously if you send someone to a random group, it's like people are coming to you and you want to care for them best that you can, and know the people that are leading the group, I know is really a great thing, or to be a part of leading it yourself, whatever the case is. But to have it be a closed group where everybody struggles, or a counselor that's leading the group, that's always a great idea too. Counselor that understands. Many counselors obviously have struggled with this issue themselves, and that's what moves us into this kind of ministry. Yeah.
In your presentation, you mentioned that there's a maintenance type, like an ongoing process. What do you guys use to encourage those people that they are going to find freedom? Because a lot of times what I've run into is people that have been struggling with it for so many years, they're like, I'm going to try this. When they don't start seeing results or anything right away, or they don't feel like they're being set free right away, they give up and they say, this is just how I am.
Yeah.
Right.
It becomes normal to accept that every guy struggles with pornography.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that false teaching out there also. It's like, they take the extreme of you're always be fighting sin to be you'll never be free from this.
Yeah.
And they take
Yeah.
that to the status.
Yeah, we live in a microwave society. Give me the 12-week course so I can stop doing this. And I tell guys right away, I'm just going to be upfront with you and serious. If you really want to be free, here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to need to read this book. You're going to need to go to this group every single week, and you're not going to put an end date on this. This is not a 12-week course where you're going to have a finish line. You may be doing this, and I just, I go through the trauma list with them. The more serious, the more often things have happened to them, the longer that it's going to take before they can, how long? Guys ask me that all the time. How long am I going to have to see a counselor every week? And I tell them 12 to 18 months. If it's a pretty serious problem, 6 months maybe. If it's if there's a 24-year-old kid that's just struggling with porn, and but after that, I tell them, you're going to learn a process that you really need to implement in your life for the rest of your life. And what it's called is sanctification. You're going to need to work on your heart. You're going to need to talk to other people about it and remain in relationships. So this is a process that you just implement and make it a part of your life.
I think getting back to the spirit of the comment, I think it would be good if you guys Christmas or present it as, one of the things you said was a new drug. Certainly more eye-opening to parents. What you guys talking about, the new drug, or something like that. And you bring it on, then initially maybe the parents can hear for the kids. Then you start thinking, wait a minute, this is a bigger issue than what I thought. And where before it could have been like for myself, it could have been like, younger and you look at this and say, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
wrong. He was right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that would open up. I think gearing it towards parents, and then it would break off.
Yes.
That's right.
Well, you know, like those Fight the New Drug videos, you can totally access those. And those could be used on a Sunday morning too. That educate about here's the impact of pornography, and just kind of in a general sense, I do think it's important as the church that we, warn our kids of these things that are going to steal life away from them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I do. That's why a lot of times we'll do a parent seminar, and that is, I hate to keep using the term gateway, but I do. It's a gateway to getting parents the help they need. It's like not so shameful to come and get help for your kids.
So make it a parent thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that when the parents get parents, they can get fixed. Right?
Well, our schedule officially ended at 2:40. we have our time here. So yeah.
You guys feel free to keep texting us questions, and we're here for you. We're a resource for your churches. My heart is still, there's a piece of my heart still down here, so thank you guys so much for having us.
Thank you for coming.